Welcome back to the PI Files, where we dig into real cases, real people, and the role of private investigators in uncovering the truth. I'm your host, Eric Peterson. I'm a licensed private investigator here in California. Today's guest is Marlon Marrache. He's a retired LAPD sergeant, an internal affairs expert, an officer representative, a consultant, a trainer, and host of the IA Guy podcast. This interview focuses on accountability, bad investigations, police discipline, lawsuits, corruption, officer wellness, and the future of policing. So thanks again, Marlon, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, your bio is pretty extensive. Can you just break down your story? Tell me, I know it's a great career, but can you tell me some of the details and the highlights?
Going down a trip, well, it's the way you say it. Going on a trip down memory lane is what I meant to say. It's not always my favorite, besides the fact that I can just wrap it up by telling you LAPD has afforded me so much success, right? 24 years. I'm coming up on 4 years of retirement this July. And let's see, I got promoted to sergeant in January of 2007. I was a sergeant for 15 years and I retired as a sergeant in July of 2022. And in my time during a sergeant is when I started getting involved in other people's dirty laundry, your favorite topic, internal affairs.
Yeah. So speaking of internal, so that's how, I don't know how you popped up on my feed, but I reached out to you recently and that you have a couple of YouTube channels. One's the IA Guy podcast and the other one's the Marlon Report. So the IA Guy podcast, what's the basis of that?
The birth of the Internal Affairs, a Police podcast was for several reasons. And so I suppose the best way to describe this journey would be the fact that we in law enforcement can agree that we use this buzzword transparency. And I always thought to myself, well, how transparent are we amongst ourselves? For the record, definitely we're very transparent with the public. I think we do a good job. I think for every critical incident, for, any type of violent crime that happens, we get on the news and, we'll do our sound bites and we'll let the community know about, a violent felon, whatever the case may be. I think we do a great job with the public being transparent from that sense in terms of crime, right? However, when you start talking about the internal conflicts, right, that involves internal affairs, right? We police our own. Guess what, man? We're just not that transparent. So I figured, you know what? Let's be transparent about what the function is. One, two. The other light bulb that hit was, well, what do people really know about internal affairs? Besides what? Besides, if you're around my age, you would know the movie Internal Affairs, right? So you know that Richard Gere was this rogue cop that was divorced and married with a whole bunch of kids. And Andy Garcia got into the Internal Affairs unit and dude, he had it out for him. He wanted to get him, right? And then you watch shows. All these shows depict and give this image of this function of internal affairs as if it's us against them. So the street cop, hates admin, hates an IA guy, right? And then whoever works. And so there's this negative stigma that all of us are on this together, that we have created to make people believe that, well, internal affairs, those people who work there, this is just the public. Well, either they're going to go after that rogue cop, or if he's really liked, then we're just going to kind of sweep it under the rug and cover up. What's that saying? God, I'm missing out. I'll get back to what people really think about this particular function where, code of silence. That's what I was thinking about, quote unquote. We have this phrase well, you know what? They take care of each other. So what it has created throughout all these decades is that there's this mystification, right, about this function. And so I took it upon myself while I was teaching up and down the state of California, having these really good conversations with sergeants, having conversations with adjudicators, lieutenants, captains that would attend the class. And I thought to myself, you know what? I got to put this on a social media platform. And so that was when December was my first episode that I dropped in 2023. Yes, 2023. And I got to tell you, bro, there was a lot of people who thought that I was crazy. There was some naysayers, some haters. People were saying, dude, why would you want to start a podcast about internal affairs? Mind you, I did my research and my homework where if you look at all these police podcasts, no one's talking about this stuff. One, two, everybody has these, topics or guests that come in hey, I'm from K9, hey, I used to work SWAT, mental wellness, leadership. Look, not to say that that's not important, but why don't we talk about a function, which by the way, it can get you fired, bro. Like if you don't know anything about the function, the process, at some point you might get terminated. And guess what? There's been guests who have been terminated. I had a guest that got terminated and got reinstated, and he told us whole story. And so here we are about 2.5 years later, right? And we're at 1.7, 1.8 million views with about over 270 guests, and blessed. It really worked. So these stories have had an impact on not just officers, right? People in our community, but also just the public. And I decided not too long ago to rebrand it to the Marlon Marrache Show because I wanted to expand and not just talk about internal affairs. So therefore, we rebranded and now it's the Marlon Marrache Show. So again, thanks for having me, bro.
Yeah, I like it. And I agree with you with respect to transparency. I think that departments, I don't know, I can't speak to all over the country, but especially out here in California, if a critical incident happens, we're in a society where people are making judgments with no law enforcement experience, no attorney, they're making judgments off of 20-second, 30-second video, and they're not seeing the big picture. In addition to that, you have officers and other people in society that are making judgments and their own theories about maybe what happened to an individual that went through an IA. And they're thinking, oh, yeah, this is what happened. This is what this person did. Oh, really? Did you investigate it? Did you see it? And I love the transparency, and you're doing a great job on it. For our audience, can you just briefly explain, what does IA actually do? What is their function?
Well, some would call it the necessary evil, but you know what? We got to police our own. You have to police wrongdoing. Where I shouldn't say where I think we go wrong, because we do go wrong. Sometimes we do investigations not so well. So I have this theory that I call, quote unquote, no stone goes unturned, where, we should be investigating this. I don't care if it's just Mrs. Johnson, that just got pulled over and she really thought that she was mistreated, disrespected, or rude, whatever the case may be. She walks in the front lobby and says, hey, I got some concerns about this traffic stop, about these two officers. We should be investigating that fully and treating her no any different than you would treat anyone in terms of having concerns about our conduct. So those are very, very important. So internal affairs just in general should be an experienced investigator who knows how to investigate, and we'll get into that a little bit later on, that would turn every single stone and be, again, very impartial, reasonable, equitable, and fair with their investigations. And so that function comes with a lot of responsibilities. But one of the big hurdles is when sergeants, when sergeants do go work internal affairs, I feel as though that it's not for all the right reasons. It's not for, your purpose is not really there for the process. It's a bit self-serving. And you know what? I'm going to take full blame on that too, because it was for me too. Hey, if I work internal affairs, I'm going to get weekends off. And I get a flex work schedule, right? A majority of law enforcement agencies work a 4-10, 4 days a week, 10 hours a day. Hey, I get Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off, or I get Saturday, Sunday, and Monday off. Oh, and by the way, since I'm off and I have a set schedule, well, I can work overtime and make more money. I'm there for the family. It's flex. I can telecommute, maybe work at home. So what you're doing is that you're actually benefiting yourself. So how much are you really in it for the accused employee? That's one of, I shouldn't say a main reason, but a very good reason to go work an assignment, by which we can consider is very, very important. Now, the other hurdle and challenge that we have by working this department is that, and don't take it from me, I've had plenty of guests come by the podcast and say, you know what? A lot of people go to internal affairs to get that feather in the cap. In other words, if you go work this assignment, guess what? You're probably going to end up getting promoted to lieutenant. So in general, these two reasons why you will work this assignment don't really align with making sure that you're turning every single stone, seeking the truth, gathering as much evidence as possible to package it all up and give to the adjudicator and say, hey, boss, here's a full, complete investigation.
So for those reasons that you gave, why not outsource that part of law enforcement?
Very, very good question, because I've been thinking about that lately, where you should be outsourcing. As a matter of fact, that's where I get kind of plug in my business, where I have an agreement, a contractual agreement with 2 agencies. Lucky me, because I've been thinking lately you should be outsourcing them. And I agree with you. If I can expand on that a little bit, it's been my experience, and I've been doing this since 2008. If you're a small to a medium-sized agency, you know what? Do yourself a favor and outsource it. You have to. There is no way that Mrs. Johnson that just got pulled over by these officers in an agency of 100 or less.
Yeah.
I'm probably even going to crank that up and say maybe 150, maybe even 200. But let's just, for the sake of this scenario, keep it at 100 or less.
Yeah.
When you have that population of sworn officers in your department, you know what? Do yourself a favor when she walks into the front desk and says, hey, I want to make a complaint because I just got pulled over and these officers were rude, discourteous, and let me tell you what happened. Go ahead and do the intake, but you know what? Outsource that. Because it has been, I wouldn't say proven, but it has been said, right? It's got this perception that after you do the intake, and here comes Sergeant Marrache in uniform to go meet with Mrs. Johnson. And I asked Mrs. Johnson, thank you for, showing up. We really appreciate your concerns. Why don't you let me know what happened? I'm telling you right now, she's going to think that because you're in uniform and you are just kind of going through the motions, because I don't know if you have a really good relationship with the two officers that I'm going to complain about, right, of this wrongdoing, or maybe you do like them, maybe you don't. I don't know that. So you try to avoid all these pre-biases.
It's a third-party, unbiased person. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge with having an outsourced third party is, how much of a relationship does that person have with the chief?
Well, they're getting paid by the city, but so you're right. They're a vendor. Yeah.
Correct. And I can give you an example where I was hired by a really good friend of mine. Now we're friends, who got a hold of me through Instagram and, all my social media posts, where he was terminated and was facing arbitration. It was a small to medium sized agency, and that particular, his IA was outsourced. The challenge, if you will, or I should say what I found very, very interesting, is that it was an attorney who was the investigator. And on the record, he goes on to say that, hi, my name is, so-and-so, and I'm here hired by this city to be the investigator. And he said, quote unquote, I'm here to be the third neutral party, is what he said. I think that's great. Fantastic. Let's move on, right? So as I'm reading his summary of his investigation, and this is pretty interesting stuff, there's a heading of findings. And I'm thinking to myself, okay. And then I read what's underneath that heading in this investigation. And it just so happens that they frame the allegations against the accused employee, which is fine. It's part of your job. I get that. But what I found interesting is that that investigator also wrote in there that he sustained these allegations. So then I started thinking to myself, well, how fair can you be when you are determining the outcome? Which, by the way, you're the one who said it on the record that you're here to remain neutral. So I started thinking to myself, well, how neutral can you be?
Came up with a conclusion, yeah.
When you determine this outcome, or I should say predetermined outcome, on behalf of the chief of police, because you and I can agree, we've been doing this for quite some time, and anybody who's in law enforcement can agree that the ultimate decision maker on every single internal affairs investigation is the chief of police. And so that was an interesting... I ended up at the arbitration here testifying on behalf of the defense. And to save you this long story, it didn't go so well for the department.
So comparing that to, if you look at like a fraud investigation, if we get hired by a law firm and they go, hey, this employee or this insured person is claiming this injury, and we go out and we do filming and documenting. We don't say, yeah, well, he's got full use of his shoulder and arms and all this. Yeah. We go, here is the report. Here is the video. That's it. We're not doctors. We're not whatever. So right. It's interesting that guy, he should have, how that was worded, but.
Yeah. And for the purposes of explaining this incident where I got hired, right, this case, the lessons learned of all this is what I'm learning is that there's this practice amongst outsourcing IAs with all these other firms. Some are retired chief of police, some are law firms, whoever it is. It just seems as though that the practice is that, we're kind of going that route. In other words, we are going to give our predetermined outcome and then turn it in. And of course, my argument is, well, okay, if that's the way you practice, you know what? I'm here to tell you with all due respect, it's not the best practice. Yeah. LEPD got it right, got something right. And this is one of those. They get a lot of things right. I'm just joking around. But from this lens, from this function, we got that right, because every single internal affairs investigator in LEPD, that's their job. At one point we had over 430.
Wow.
They're probably down to like in the hundreds, maybe 200s, if that. but your sole job is to turn it in. And here goes your D3, right? Detective 3 or your lieutenant. And they're the adjudicators.
Yeah.
And by the way, that lieutenant and that detective did just checks and balances, formatting, making sure all the evidence is there. And guess what? They have to go brief the captain, but you don't see a lieutenant, or a detective putting a heading, well, you know what? Hey, boss, I think this should be sustained. To your point, if I'm a robbery detective right now, and I got this 211 suspect we've been looking for the last, couple of months, I show up to work on Monday, patrol says, hey, man, we got him. Now he's in the box. Okay, cool. I grab everything and, I walk in there, what? I try to get a confession. They're either going to lie or they're invoke their Miranda rights. Okay, cool. Well, I don't go to the DA's office and say, hey, you know what? Go ahead and fill out that charge sheet. I'll see you at the prelim because, he did it.
Yeah.
Here's another example that I've been thinking about lately. As a background investigator, same thing. You think a background investigator tells the chief, you know what, Marlon, he's good to go. You should hire him. As a matter of fact, here it is. Yeah. Hire him. You're making that come on behalf of the person who has the ultimate decision maker. Yeah. So to wrap it all up, that's what happens with one of the major challenges outside LAPD, where you have all these agencies outsourcing these investigations. And again, don't take my experience, as the hardcore truth as a best practice. But what I will say is that you do overreach and you muddy, the entire process when you as an investigator kind of make these predetermined outcomes on behalf of the chief of police. That's just my feeling, and so far we'll see, there's a lot of work to be done.
And the smaller agencies, I think that some of it, those predetermined outcomes are at the will. They've been told this is what you're going to do. Yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up, and we can go down that rabbit hole where that chief says, hey, man, you know what? This is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Now imagine this, though, and let's kind of paint another little bit of scenario. What if you, as an investigator, make the predetermined outcome and say, yeah, you know what, neglect of duty, violation of policy, sustained. And then all of a sudden you turn it in, and for whatever reason, right, after roundtabling with the commander, the chief says, you know what, make them unfounded.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, right? Well, so you just got done paying, an outside investigator all this money, time and effort to do a full-blown investigation by which he or she determined that they actually did it, right? Sustained means it occurred. Yeah. But then you're going to turn around and say, no. Mm-hmm. And let's just say there's a civil claim for damages. If you see my show, the common thing amongst the 270 guests has been, hey, Marlon, the punishment's not the penalty. The punishment is the process. I can't sleep. And you make this claim, look what the department put me through. Yeah. Well, if I was representing you and I was your attorney, one of my first witnesses that I'm going to call is that investigator and say, hey, didn't you make it sustained? You said it happened, but then the chief's saying that it didn't happen, and it can go back and forth. My point is that you're creating inconsistencies, discrepancies, and you're at a trial, or whoever else looks at stuff like this is just going to question your, the way you go about adjudicating complaints.
Yeah. So speaking of a chief, and let's take a smaller department, because LAPD is broken down into how many divisions now?
There's like 20 or 23 or something.
So when I started, it was 18, and the chief essentially is like the captain of the department, right?
Yes.
Unless it's something crazy. But so if you break it down to like a smaller agency, typically the chief is probably going to hear about every little thing that comes about. And speaking of little things, with body cams now, with car cameras, all of this, if Mrs. Johnson comes into the station, in my opinion, efficiency-wise, and I believe this happens at some smaller agencies where they'll review the video and go, hey, Mrs. Johnson, they didn't swear at you at all, so get out. And so, sorry you got your ticket, but you're upset about that as opposed to you're lying about what happened. And so I think that if, in government and a lot of departments, efficiency is not the best quality of some of those places. It's just not an efficient place. Police departments, for the most part.
Correct. If I may chime in on that, where, again, my beloved LAPD did come up with an adjudication called demonstrably false. Okay. Not many people hear the term demonstrably false. To your point, Mrs. Johnson comes in and makes a complaint. You go watch body-worn video. It never happened. No any different than you just made sergeant. Congratulations. You go to Starbucks, you get your cup of coffee, and all of a sudden someone flags you down and says, hey, I saw those two officers over there take someone out of the car and they threw them up against the wall. okay, Mr. Johnson, you know what? Let me get your information. Give me about 24 to 48 hours and I'll get back to you. So you go watch body-worn video and guess what? It never happened. That's a DF.
Yeah.
That's an adjudicate. That is when I used to teach, or when we teach, that is about the only time at that stage, at the intake level, where we should allow sergeants to adjudicate an internal affairs complaint investigation. Because you can just sit there and go, yeah, of course, tell your bosses, right? Tell the lieutenant, the captain, the chief, say, hey, you know what? I just got done reviewing video. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to go ahead and adjudicate this because this is the DF. This is demonstrably false. And so, again, we have a policy, which is good. You should have rules, boundaries, things written down as opposed to just kind of, making a decision depending on the circumstances, nilly-willy and say, oh, yeah, no, we should do this one, a full-blown IA or maybe not. And so we're good at that. We're good with a little bit of structure, have some formation, and have some boundaries as to when you can adjudicate and when not. So in my experience, yes, that's where the efficiency comes in.
Yeah.
And we're pretty good at that.
Yeah. And then, getting to those, like the smaller agencies, a chief can determine whether to investigate something or not.
Correct.
And so I've heard of some crazy stuff that wasn't investigated and some weird stuff that was. And so I think it's interesting. So that leads to my next question.
Yeah.
Where do you think politics come into play on these things?
What?
And when I ask that, medium-sized, small department, large department, is it all the same?
As much as I hate to say this, it's all the same.
Yeah.
And let me explain to you why. In my beloved LAPD, I always describe it this way. You have at least, I should say, formally, 6 hands in the cookie jar. Mm-hmm. So you have the Captain 1 and the Captain 3 at the division who weigh in on every single complaint, IA complaint investigation. You have the Deputy Chief and the Commander at Bureau who weigh in on this IA. Then you have the Deputy Chief and Commander in Internal Affairs who weigh in on this IA. And guess what? Someone's got to go to the 10th floor and sell it to the chief. Okay, so essentially you have, now I just explained to you at least 6 hands that, and you would think there's concurrence on all these levels of review. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. I should say the challenge is that at some point it gets personal. And that when it gets personal, it becomes political. It becomes politics. It becomes favoritism. It becomes nepotism. Now, I'm not just going to, throw my LAPD under the bus. I'm going to tell you right now, it happens in every single department, not just in the state of California. It happens across the nation. That's because I don't like Peterson and I just don't like Marlon. You know what? Marlon's a good dude. So
yeah.
I'm going to let this one slide. But Peterson, give it to him. I always use the example where you have the traffic stop and the driver, that violated speeding, whatever, one of those traffic violations, or I should say moving violations for that matter. And, the slick, good looking dude that's all built and everybody likes him. He's doing SWAT, and everybody at the division just thinks, oh, dude, this guy's golden, right? And he gets a complaint for being rude and discourteous. And all of a sudden it goes up the chain, right? Here's the challenge. If small agency, if you're the chief, you're like, no, dude, this guy dropped I watched the video, did 5 F-bombs and he was completely and by the way, there's only 3,000 people in the population in this city. They can run into each other at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Or he can be having Code 7 lunch and he or she might walk in.
Yeah.
The complainant, right? And you and the chief are going, I want to hammer this guy.
Yeah.
Give him a couple days at the beach. That's what you guys call it, right? Suspension. Give him a couple days at the beach. And you have your command staff, right? The captain, the commander, the lieutenant say, you know what? Peterson, he's a good dude. Just, you know what?
Yeah.
No, let's just reprimand him. Give him paper penalty. Let's just counsel him and bring him in and be okay, right? And of course, you as a chief, you're like, well, I don't have the backing of my staff, right? My circle. These are my guys. This is my team. And so it almost feels as though as a chief is backed into the corner and you're just going to okay, you know what? All right, cool. However, if that same officer is badge heavy, completely rude, has a history, right?
Yeah.
Of just being, an Adam Henry, right? And he's not liked. And he walks like his shit don't stink in the station. The minute that complaint comes in for that moving violation, that traffic stop, everybody's going to say, got him. You know what? This is the one. Let's fire him. So again, at some point it gets personal.
Also, if that person he pulled over was a somebody in the city that was prominent or maybe related to a city council person, and that person calls the chief. That chief's job is at will. I don't think a lot of people in the public know this. That's an at will position for most, right? And a sheriff, I think, is elected for a couple years, but that person, that city manager or whatever, can go, sir, you're gone. You got to do what we want you to do. And in one of your previous podcasts, you talked about police departments. I think it was two guys from like Foothill Division or something, and then maybe the Beto from Rampart.
Yes.
You talked about, and we're going to reference those, but you talked about different politics in police departments and cities. I don't think you can accurately assess that. I think Beto actually made mention that it is tough to accurately assess it, because I think sometimes it's every man out for themselves, every man or woman out for themselves, and that chief is at the whim of that city, and these guys want to promote to their. And I think when you talk about IA, sometimes it's a checkbox for a promotion, like you said, and then they go, look at I hold everybody accountable. I was great, right, chief? And then they could say that in their interviews for chief themselves. And,
yes.
And it is just a crazy, and I think that with LAPD, that I heard, and there's a scene in End of Watch where the guy's like, you're going to get freeway therapy. You don't have to worry about these people out in the street. You got to worry about the people that you work with a lot of times.
Yes, I've heard that from a couple of guests where, one guest in particular, shout out to Sarah, who said, admin can get you killed.
Yeah.
And that is so important. What I find so fascinating, if you will, is that we don't talk about this stuff to the young officers. We don't. One of my first questions I ask all my guests is, hey, when you're in the academy, did anyone from internal affairs come in and explain you what the process is? Anybody, right? And Post has their mandated requirements for all your learning domains, your LDs. Nowhere in there it talks about the IA process. And guess what? This process can get you fired, man. And so what do we leave it up to when you're on probation? On probation, what happens? Either you're going to get an IA, and that's like, welcome, now, and you're like caught by surprise because it's the unknown to you. And by the way, you feel like your world just turned upside down, like you're going to lose everything. That's the culture that we've created decades, even before I came on. And so, or what happens? You ask your FTOs, or your FTOs say what? You see those guys over there in the suits? Don't talk to them. They're Blue Falcons. They're the Rat Squad. They joined the dark side, and so we're all accountable for this, to change that. And it's just very, very unfortunate. So I think that we can do a way better job, not just LAPD, just agencies across California and across the nation, where we can kind of educate and just give some really good information to the young officers. Do it in orientation. Take 30 minutes of your time. I've offered myself for free to go to academies and say, hey, you know what? Give me 30 minutes to explain to you, to explain to you the 3 Bs: booze, babes, and bad debt.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. Look, booze, alcohol, and by the way, you're a temporary employee, which means that I can fire you with no cause whatsoever. Yeah. Right? We can just say you're not fit for duty and you're gone. Mm-hmm. I don't have to give you a reason. Babes, hey man, you start dating and things go wrong while you're on probation. You date one, you date the other. They call and say, oh my God, we broke up. Look what he did to me. That's real bad. And then last but not least is bad debt. You start spending money that you don't have, and what? Desperate times calls for desperate measures. You see yourself in trouble. But if we actually give these young officers, these cadets, these recruits, some really good base, a foundational, let's just say a good foundation of information about the process, I think that we can save careers, bro. But you know what?
Because
we're trying to do it.
Yeah, and there's manipulation, and you're doing a great job at it. And I know that you've talked about this, and I was 10B 95, and there was no education. We learned a lot of Spanish, and there was no cultural diversity, but there was nothing about this type of thing until you go through it. Just like in police work in general, a lot of things you're just learning on the job, because there's that thing where you leave the academy and your FTO says, forget about everything you learned. You're going to learn it here. What I learned, my first division, you get bounced around. You don't get your choice. So my first division was Northeast, and a guy by the name of Captain Hillman was in charge. So pretty like a legendary SWAT and mobile field force.
He's a legend.
So my first training officer, here I am, 22, first training officer. And I guess Northeast at that time was known as a place where people got admin transferred to because they were bad apples. This guy, I don't think he was like a bad apple. I think the story I heard is he rolled up to the Rodney King, because that happened in Foothill, right? Mm-hmm. Rolled up to the Rodney King incident and then drove back to the station or his call, didn't get out of his car. Everybody and their brother in the 20, 50-mile radius got either fired or transferred or whatever. And so he was grumpy. He was known as grumpy. So he would yell. I ended up winning him over, but that was like my first exposure. So I'm like, oh, okay. And so, but you're right. You just hear little snippets. And then, hopefully you talk to somebody who is a defense rep or something, and you just try to absorb that information. But departments need to do a better job. But I think that they're just like, hey, that's not our focus. They'll learn. Burn them to learn them type of thing.
Burn them to learn them, yeah. And again, we can just do better by just being transparent. Wow, there's goes that word. We just need, just kind of let people know that this internal affairs process is, look, man, it's not easy. It's not liked.
Yeah.
We have a job to do, and I'm going to try to make you feel like you're not a suspect. I'm going to try to make it as comfortable as possible for you. At least try.
Yeah.
Right. Mr. Johnson just walked in. That's another thing. We don't do that. Hey, Mr. Johnson just walked in the lobby and said, you guys were, we're kind of rude and disrespectful in this traffic stop. What are you talking about, Sergeant? Look, we're going to go through the process. That's our big machine, because you and I both know that we have zero tolerance for any complaint. You can thank, the Rampart scandal and what happened with the riots in 1992. All that led to Special Order Number 1 in 1997, when Chief Parks pretty much said, you know what, from now on, zero tolerance on all alleged misconduct, meaning that anyone can walk into any police station. You can request for a supervisor. You can call the hotline. You can write an email to the LAPD.online and make any absurd complaint. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Yeah. Maybe it was a misrepresentation. Whatever the case may be, we have to cut paper and we have to investigate it. And my, challenge, which, the kids call it cringe, my challenge with that is, come on, man, we can do better. Meaning it's been almost 30 years, man.
Yeah.
Let's kind of adapt and change with things. We can't just take every single complaint. And I'm here to tell you, I've taught up and down the state of California. There's agencies in Northern California that they don't even have, the CF number, the control. They don't have a full-blown investigation. You can come in the front lobby and make a complaint, and all the law and the rule says that you have to investigate.
Yeah.
Doesn't say how, doesn't say when. Well, there is some boundaries with Peace Officers' Bill of Rights, but you have to address it, right? So they call it inquiries. There's a lot of agencies that I've learned, well, to do an inquiry and, and deal with them then.
Yeah.
There's mediation, there's a whole bunch of different avenues, which, by the way, we've gotten better. And I'm not, I'm not knocking just, my beloved LAPD, but I'm just saying that particular order is very archaic. I mean, come on, we're coming up on 30 years. And before I forget, for the record, I want your audience to know is that and I'm going to contradict myself here, because I was one of those that wanted, the weekends off, wanted to flex work schedule. Yeah, I think at some point when I walked into the lieutenant, interview, for promotion, it would have looked good. But for me, my the main purpose, I was in my second year of law school, and what I really wanted to do is to be a police attorney. That was it. And so I was at officer rep section before I got the sergeant 2 spot in internal affairs. But I knew that going into the advocate section, so internal affairs and LAPD has a certain unit, a section, where your sole job is just to put on these hearings. Basically, you're acting like a prosecuting attorney. You're in this, as much as I hate to say this kangaroo court type of setting, tribunal hearing, where you're presenting to a 3-panel member. And so for me, that's where I gained a lot of my experience, because I know in law school, in your 4 years, if you ever decide to go to law school, you're going to have moot court, or what they call trial advocacy, where you have to prepare for trials. So for me, it gave me that experience. And lucky me, I had about 30 of those under my belt. So that kind of prepared me to, to argue, to really, and go up with some really, really good attorneys on the other side. So,
and they give you your best education. I remember testifying in court on criminal cases. I learned so much from the defense attorneys, that, I mean, it's just, it helps you tremendously, I would imagine. Getting back to Rampart.
Yes.
Because I actually was, in LA, you could work, you have your probation. And so maybe you're working like 6 months with a partner, very limited with an FTO. And then they're putting you in a U-boat, which was like a report writing car. And then I asked the sergeant, I go, hey, any specialized units that I can go to? So they sent me to this thing called Narcotics Enforcement Team in Rampart at MacArthur Park. So essentially it was a command post, and we were in detective cars. Well, slick tops, I believe, or we had multiple cars, but essentially we were doing surveillance and stopping people for the rock cocaine. And obviously, I don't know if you've seen I'm sure you have, MacArthur Park, they're trying to, DEA's in there. But it was an interesting thing, but it was like a 4-block radius. Rampart was real small. But so I was there at the time that I guess all the Rampart stuff was going on. Then I go down to Harbor, and then eventually I make my way up to South Bureau Crash. So how this relates is the Rampart scandal happens. So here I am, worked all the way up to this position, a pretty good position. South Bureau Crash handles all gang stuff in South LA. And they tell us in 2 days, figure out what you want to do, what station you want to work at. And I think they were going to send us to the front desk. I said, are you kidding me? Oh, yeah. All the gang all crash teams are done. I think that was a Parks thing, right?
Yeah.
They go, find out where. So I ended up going to like a robbery table in Harbor. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So the citizens suffered so much because of that. I understand. But this was one division, maybe a handful of guys, whatever it was. But then you talk about Beto that you interviewed. How many, a year or two? 2 years. 3 years. So they go, oh, we're coming after you. And it's probably criminal. And he fights it. He gets his job back. And man, I can only imagine the stress that he went through in that roller coaster. My point is, when you look at something like that, can something like that be prevented? Because the city and South Central at that time suffered because they didn't have aggressive policing. And then B, there was money paid out. Well, there was cases put on everybody, and there was money paid out to people because they put cases on people. How do you prevent that?
That's a loaded question. There's so many different angles to the scandal, which I question. If there's one thing I learned in law school is that words have meanings. And after meeting with Beto Tovar, I started asking myself, are we really going to call it a scandal? And I've had guests come in, and that's one of the things that we talk about. And I've had investigators that were part of the Rampart task force to investigate all this. What I will say is this particular topic, which, by the way, is considered to be a landmark historical incident in the Los Angeles Police Department, people can't stop thinking about, Officer Perez and Officer Nino Durden. When you bring this up, the first thing that comes to mind is, hey, Kevin Gaines in the shooting, what happened with Frank Liga, the Ovando, they framed him and shot him, and, they got criminally convicted for that. So there's, he, in August of 1998, he stole cocaine from LAPD's property division, decided to act like a drug dealer. Okay, got that.
Yeah.
We do. However, and there's movies made out of stuff like this. You name it, documentaries, movies, the whole nine. And what I've been trying to do is the forgotten piece to this big, big picture. But in order for me to illustrate and give you this full picture of the missing piece, what the missing piece is Beto Tovar, right? It's the administrative process. In other words, if this show, right, the Marlon Marrache Show, the Internal Affairs State Police podcast, has been true to the quote-unquote, shout out to Jimmy Z, I'm going to market it one day, the punishment is not the penalty, the punishment is the process, then we really got to talk about all this. Because what ends up happening, just administrative, so I want to make very, very clear, because I try to explain this a couple of times as a guest. So I want to make clear that I'm only talking about the disciplinary machine, the disciplinary process by which was all started when Officer Perez decided to say, hey, you know what? All these arrests that we've made, we made it up, we fabricated, so on and so forth. So we already know, and I think there's, videos out there, there's research, newspaper articles where I want to say it's in the ballpark of 56 cases that were thrown out. Mm-hmm. That's criminal, right? Okay, got that part. But what these young officers and what your audience probably doesn't know is what the department put these other, I can start off with saying 54 or 56 of our colleagues going through this whole administrative disciplinary machine, right? They don't know what they went through. And to this very day, I'm still looking for them. Come tell me, And out of those 54 or 56, according to the paper and the research, 5 got terminated. You know what? They got that wrong.
Wow.
It was only actually 4. You know what else the research and the papers didn't tell you? Is out of those 4, 3 got reinstated. Okay. And out of those 3, right, 3 got reinstated, right? And out of the 3, one of them didn't go through the disciplinary machine, the border rights process. One of them was relieved from duty. When I say a very long time, a very, very long time, like a long, long time, right? The other 2 got reinstated. But you know what? No one knows about that journey or that story, right? And in addition to all that, the one that ended up getting terminated, guess what? That termination, that incident that got him fired had absolutely nothing to do with stealing cocaine out of the property division of LAPD, 1, 2. And guess what? It didn't even happen in Rampart at all. And so where do they get to tell their story? Where do we, again, being transparent, if you will, have a stage, right? A platform where they can tell us and say, look what the department put me through. And Beto was my first one.
Good.
Who said that, you know what, even after I got terminated and I appealed it, and even when the judge says the department got it wrong and I was reinstated on paper, I still had to wait for 6 more of these hearings, these border rights hearings.
Yeah.
And I was at home knowing that I got my job back. And then finally, when there was a transition between Chief Parks to then Chief Bratton, there was a chief by the name of Pomeroy, who was the interim chief. And someone got in his ear and said, hey, man, you know what? Enough is enough.
Yeah.
We've done so much damage emotionally and mentally to these guys to put them through this whole process. We got to get him back. And Tovar was one of those where he got reinstated. So my point to my project, my point to me being very passionate about this is because not just me, and again, don't take it from me, my guests truly believe it wasn't a scandal. It was a Officer Perez scandal is what it was, and that's fair. When I think of a scandal, I think of like Memphis PD, right? Those 4 officers in that specialized unit a couple of years ago was the boyfriend, the girlfriend was dating someone or something. They did a traffic stop and they handcuffed this dude and they just beat the brakes off this person. All on camera.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
They're wearing hoods. They kicked them all. Memphis PD. They got indicted. And okay, well, that's like 5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that. And maybe you might want to open up some more doors and go down some rabbit holes. You're probably going to find other scandalous behavior.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Baltimore PD, I was turned on by a host who told me, I don't know if you recall, I think it was 2000, I forgot it was 14 or 2016, where Baltimore PD's like gun task force, where 16 officers got criminally indicted for selling, guns and planting evidence. Okay, 16 officers in a unit, on a specialized unit, got that.
Yeah.
But if we're going to say that Rampart crash at the time, I don't know, 2018, right? P2s, P3s, couple of sergeants, a lieutenant, and then they report to the captain.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to say, so because of what he did, we're going to say that everybody's scandalous. I'm going to call bullshit. To your point, you were at the Southwest crash. Chief Parks got to the point where, you know what? Not only are they scandalous, you know what? This whole crash citywide is scandalous. So you know what? Disband them. It's just my way of having a platform for my guests to not necessarily give me, I'm not interested in all the details about what happened, but what I am interested in is in you. You were able to survive. And guys like Tovar, what people don't know, he did a 31-year career and retired as a detective supervisor. And he's one hell of a cop and he was one hell of a detective. And he was a great supervisor from, all my colleagues, and that's the story.
Yeah.
Now, with all that being said, is how do I get people to understand that it wasn't a scandal? Well, here comes part 2. Part 2 is that a lot of your audience might not know is that during the 1980s all the way to the mid-1990s, you were right in the middle, right smack in the middle of the crack cocaine era. 1, 2, it was very aggressive police work. You know that. You caught the end of it. You're 95. You were out in the streets, 96, 97, 98. 96, 97 was off the hook. I mean, there was, I think it was, and I get this wrong, and please, someone chime in and comment and talk about, I want to say, Tovar said, was it 95 or maybe 94? 168 homicides within a 6.5 square mile.
Yeah, I heard
in
that.
Rampart.
I think I heard that.
That is crazy. And you heard of the competition. Hey, 77 has 190 this year. Well, we had 191. We beat you in homicide, which, by the way, the homicides, victims weren't, the mom and dad that went to the liquor store and they got shanked and, and murdered. It was gang on gang crimes, So what the public, when we're going to start talking about scandal, to be transparent, if you will, that community loved Crash. They loved officers. They knew that it was us against them. As a matter of fact, in 1992, Deputy Chief Dotson even went on KCET on this 1 hour special where he said, there is a declaration of war against gangs and drugs. So, buckle up, man, because so police work, right? It's very aggressive. It was different. Operation Hammer, right? Let's go fight crime before crime even occurs. I know you see a Toyota Camry 2 a.m, you see a Honda Accord, or you see he looks like, so it was night. I have a guest, he was my sergeant who told me he was a watch commander in Rampart in 1994. Within the first 4 hours, 3 homicide scenes. So again, when you start painting that picture, and I've only had about 2 or 3 guests, I want to let the audience and the public know how violent and what police work was like back then.
Yeah.
And then you look at what happened at Rampart, right? And then you can make your own decision what you thought it was. Now, because of stealing cocaine out of a, property division of LAPD, I think things have completely changed. I mean, 2001, we won a consent decree.
Yeah.
Could we do things better? Yes. Is there more checks and balances? Yes. Body-worn video. Perfect example, you're right. I mean, for us, it was January of 2016. So we're 10 years in. So my point to this whole story, to wrap it all up, is the fact that maybe sometimes we have to get through a storm to get to be better at what we do, not just in law enforcement. I was supposed that would be in other major professions as well.
I think that, and that also is individualistic. I think when people go through stuff, they come out stronger. But was it not reported? Because obviously, perhaps police departments and cities help out with media. What gets put out in the media now is a different ballgame with what you're doing and what a lot of people are doing. But but was there not like a wrap up, article of, hey, check this out, 56 people for
I got that from. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because there was there's actually 2. I've only read 1. There's a Board of Inquiry report that came out of the public.
Yeah.
March 1st, 2020? I think it was March 1st, 2020. No, I'm sorry. March 1st, 2000. I would have to look. I have a little clip. Anyways, I think it was March 1st, 2000. Your audience can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this public Board of Inquiry Rampart Corruption Incident Report is what it is. Well, here's the deal. That was published on March 1st, 2000. Guess what? Tovar got relieved from duty in January of 2000. His Board of Rights was in June or July of 2000. So you know what that tells me? That tells me that they didn't care about the outcome. They put out a published report while one of the 4 terminations is about to go through the process. Mm-hmm. That's not transparency. That's not being thorough. That's not wanting to get to what? To the truth, or wanting to get to, I suppose I can say it again, the truth of the matter, right? The truth is that we should wait until these 56 officers go through everything and see what we can do to improve this process. And we never did that. There's no report out there that says, hey, out of the 56, these were the allegations that we're looking at, and we decided to discipline them this way, So what do I got to do? I got to bring in guests who worked internal affairs, who worked Rampart, and they're going to tell me. They're either going to tell me, hey, Marlon, you know what? I waited like 2 years to get an adjudication, a disposition on my IA. Or I can bring an internal affairs investigator who worked IA at the time, part of that task force, and say, hey, dude, we had to settle, which, by the way, I did. Shout out to Mario, who said, hey, man, we settle hundreds of these administrative cases because it just wasn't there. As a matter of fact, they were putting pieces of the puzzle together from like 5, 6, 7 years ago, So,
well, let me ask you this. When you break it down, and this isn't easily broken down, but to kind of simplify it for the audience, Perez gets arrested.
August of 1998.
Okay. So then did he try to strike some sort of deal to say, hey, listen, it's not just me, guys, but I'll tell you everything if you can lessen my sentence. What was his motivation to screw everybody
according
over?
To the articles, according to the research and the papers and the journalists and the investigators, there was this quote unquote sweetheart deal.
Okay.
Hey, I don't want to go to Corcoran.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to die. Yeah. Someone's going to kill me, So, hey, it's self-serving on my part. Let me tell you about all the arrests I made in these years that, I've worked with some of my partners and, and we just cut corners. We were shady and we made stuff up and destroyed evidence too. And we planted stuff on people. And that's when the department said, oh, wow, That's fucking mind blowing. And we're going to take your word for it.
Yeah.
You know?
You're a good guy.
Yeah, you're a good guy. And then, of course, if you were in his inner circle and you liked him, he's probably not going to throw you under the bus.
Yeah.
Right? He's not going to blue falcon you. But if he didn't like you, then you're going to get blue falconed. And that's the way it came down. Now, no offense to him. I don't know him. And to be quite honest with you, I don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to sensationalize him again. I don't. Look, man, like I said before, movies, shows, all kinds of, literature, research, the journalists, everybody has tapped into all that,
Yeah.
I don't want to glorify, what he did. That's done, man. This happened, almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in is I want the ones that went through it.
Yeah.
I want to know what that process was like. So
Not to talk about him more, but
yeah, go ahead.
I wonder if he did his time. Where is he now?
Some have told me that he's locally here in the state of California. Someone told, I think it was in the East Coast. I don't know, but yeah, he's out.
But he's out.
Yeah, he's out. He did minimal time.
Now, getting to the money portion, because if you look at, we'll just say government overspending it or any sort of spending, it'd be interesting to know from day one to all that, maybe some lawsuits they paid out and all that. I mean, I don't think the taxpayers are aware of a lot of these things. Small city, big city, medium-sized city, it doesn't matter. I think a lot of gets pushed under the rug. And I think there's things that get sealed and all this. And it's interesting because I think if the taxpayers knew how much of a waste a lot of this stuff is, they'd be pissed off.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's a lot of time and effort and resources, which, by the way, kind of influences internal affairs adjudications. It does.
Yeah, yeah.
You can be in a small agency and it's on social media, every platform, right? And it's sensationalized.
Yeah.
And then the investigator does their job very thorough, right? No stone goes unturned, turns it into the chief and says, we don't have anything here.
Yeah.
So then the chief's going to be like, and there's a lot of pressure on me, political.
Yeah.
We spent all this, it's been 2 years, we spent all this money.
Yeah.
I got to do something.
Yeah.
So who do we make the fall guy? That happens a lot too.
Yeah. Are you familiar with any other states or just California in general? Because your business operates in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But if another state called you, you could consult with them.
Yeah. I got a case out of Alabama, which, we won't go into because it's still right now.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, we're waiting to go to the Alabama Supreme Court.
Yeah.
You know who you are. Yeah, and I got phone calls. I had a potential client from Florida. Florida's wild. Florida's a whole different animal.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't just do California, but I do have cases where I've been hired mostly here out of California for my expertise.
So when you look at those other states, say Alabama, say Florida, are you like, these people got it right? I will say, so I came here from Chicago, and I personally believe LAPD does a lot of things right. Like my dad brought some stuff from LAPD, like the crash stuff we were doing, the homicide stuff. He shared it with Chicago and started some things there.
Yes.
So, and I think every department should share, best practices throughout the country.
We are definitely the best when it comes to practically any law enforcement function, by far.
Yeah.
You're right. Look, the state of California came up with the Senate Bill 2, right? Your decertification process here in the state of California. We also did AB 392, which is the revamp, right? The renovation of 835 APC, which is your use of deadly force. If you're an officer, that is the Bible. That is the use of force Bible. You need to know 835 APC. Part of AB 392 after the Summer of Love. It wasn't just California. The majority of police agencies reform their use of force policy, and that 835 APC is your use of deadly force, which is completely has changed. 835A alone, it's not our days. Remember ATD, ask, tell, and do.
Yeah.
You remember, 835 APC is what? Affect and arrest, prevent and escape, or overcome resistance, which is a really good base. It's a good foundation, right? So anytime that you use force, you got to have those three. I don't care who you are, you better have that in your mind. However, if you really read the 835 APC currently, it's way more than, it's like 2 pages of just a lot of stuff. I mean, de-escalation, super important. You have to have somewhat of a de-escalation process, whatever you want to call that, but you need to implement de-escalation. We talked about, responding calls to mental wellness, totality of circumstances. They codified Grant v. Connor, objective and reasonable standards. So all that is now in one basket, And so what Illinois did, they mirrored Senate Bill 2, your decertification revocation process of your license, of your certification of a police officer, but they also adopted 835 APC very, very much alike. And there's others. I think Arizona, there's a couple of other agencies, because I used to teach also OIS investigations, crime scene management, or I should say shooting scene management.
So I want to get to that. So
Yeah.
Can you explain to the public what happens after an officer-involved shooting department? Why?
A lot. That investigation is going to require all hands on deck. It's a full-blown, second-by-second, frame-by-frame investigation that's going to take a very, very long time. I shouldn't say a very long time. It's going to take a lot because depending on the circumstances, you're going to require a lot of horsepower, or I should say manpower, to investigate. And so from the minute that the first sergeant arrives at scene of an OIS, an officer-involved shooting, there's a lot of responsibilities of that particular sergeant. And then comes a full-blown investigation with precipient witnesses, whether you heard, right? Whether you saw it, and whether you saw or heard both, right? And of course, your more precipient being the non-lethal, right? Because everybody, you got to do non-lethal. The partners over there, in LAPD, we throw a really wide net because we have all those resources, right? This 2-man unit, secondary unit comes, then another backup comes, the sergeant's there, then you have the other sergeant, sergeant arrives, he's got to get that PSS, the public safety statement. Someone's got to declare that they have command and control. And by the way, we also have the airship. So now you got the tactical flight officer and the pilot who were involved, and they have duties and responsibilities as it relates to this incident. So it's a very, very complex investigation. And it normally should take about 280 days around there, maybe 7 or 8 months, to investigate fully, depending on the circumstances. But yeah, it's a full-blown operation, man. And here we go again. A lot of agencies have adopted force investigation, FID. Shout out to FID because they do a really, really good job. And I was fortunate to be part of those call-outs because as a defense rep, my job was to prepare and to represent all the precipient witnesses, not the shooter. The shooter is represented by the lawyer that gets paid the big bucks just to represent the shooting officer or officers. So yeah, that's, so in our class, kind of walk you through the whole process. Because can you imagine being in a real small agency in Central California?
Yeah.
And you get your cup of coffee, next thing you know, officer needs help. And you get there and your closest backup is like 15 minutes away. And, so it just depends. So it's good to know. It's good to know the process and be ready for it.
Yeah. I wonder if that's another thing people need to educate themselves on.
A lot of what we do is information and educate. And that's what I try to do a lot with these conversations like we're having, where the average police officer doesn't know. There's this saying that my partner, shout out to James Tacchini, man, I love you, JT, where he used to say that you don't choose the OIS. The OIS chooses you. Yeah. He's so right about that. And you know what? You want to be prepared for that day.
A couple come to mind. One popped up recently. I'd like to get into it in Torrance, where some officers shot a person with an airsoft gun, but I think it's currently in court. Another one, there's a woman in Newton, McBride is her last name. I don't know what happened to her, but did she get ousted or something? Or
yeah, I think there was some controversy with the last couple of rounds. I think it was a round or two where she engages, and that got taken all the way to. I think at some point round they're taken to the Supreme Court, California, that is, right? I mean, there's been appeals because she was punished for that. And, there's some major controversy involving that particular OIS. But look, what I will say just in general in OIS is, let's kind of always try not to pass judgment or be critical because we don't know everything. We don't. And one of the things that I definitely do in my YouTube channel, I don't the breakdowns, those body cams, go to the Marlon Report. It's the crazy Karen and the ones that just don't want to go along with the program. Yeah. Because even when we taught, I will always say, you know what, I've never been involved in OIS. I don't think I ever want to live knowing that I took someone else's life. I don't know what that's like. We can agree that the loss of life is just tragic and devastating for both families. And I think we forget that. Yeah. I think the community and the public, because of the media, they have a major responsibility. They steer it in such a way that we forget about the family of the shooting officer. Yeah. They're suffering just as much. And so when, I'm no one at all. My friends make fun of me. You don't work the South and you didn't work 77. You don't work Southeast. You're not a street cop. You did minimal time. You know what? Have that B, I will tell you that I would never want to put I can't place my shoes. I can't place myself in your shoes because I wouldn't know what it was like when you made that decision in less than 30 seconds. So.
Yeah, and an attorney told me one time, you only see a snippet and you don't see the entire 360-degree view, and you really got to step back. And I think, but we're in a culture that true crime and that I'm going to give my opinion whether you like it or not.
You want answers like right now.
Yeah, everybody wants instant answers, instant gratification. It's like, no, these things take time. And we talked about this at the beginning with departments being transparent about that stuff. And I think it's good.
Now, what we can do better in terms of critical incidents, right? OIS is being the most popular because that's what happens most, as opposed to an in-custody death or like excessive force when someone gets hospitalized. That's a critical incident as well. With that being said, I think that we can do a better job letting the public know about the outcome. So in other words, I forget what the bill was, SB, I want to say it was 1421, where it says that you're required as a police agency to let the public know within 30 to 45 days of a critical incident.
Yeah.
So that's when you see on YouTube, all these agencies, hey, my name is, Captain so-and-so or Lieutenant or Chief. We're going to tell you today about, the incident that happened, the critical incident. And then, and they do a good job. They show the weapon, they show the suspect, they show a body-worn video, they'll edit some stuff out. That's great. I think that's fantastic. But right after that, you get that dopamine hit, like you're fixated, like, but after that, what do we know about the adjudication? We don't.
Yeah.
We're either going to know two things. One, you either got criminally convicted, right? Or you didn't get filed on criminally. And then what? Well, what was the outcome of your shooting? What about the tactics, and all that stuff? Was your shooting in policy? I think that portion of this whole process of this critical incident, we can do a little better.
I think there's other things that could be done better. I think after people are in traumatic incidents, there's probably not a lot of follow-up for helping them, or people that are going through IA stuff. In Beto's interview, which I encourage everybody to listen to, I'll put a link on it for that. But he talked about he was reaching out to people. A lot of people just turn their backs.
One thing that we can do better in this process is that when we are told that you are not allowed to speak to anyone besides your attorney, your rep, your officer, or me, the investigator, is that we isolate them.
Yeah.
And so we put them in the island all by themselves. And you got that gag order, which, by the way, there's one particular case where in Northern California, that gag order doesn't exist. We can get into that, later on.
Yeah.
But when we feel isolated and everyone else disassociates yourself with you, right? And it's the holiday season, right? Hey, Peterson, can you ask your wife to bring in, that pumpkin pie? Love it every year, right? And we're the thin blue line.
Yeah.
One big happy family, and we take care of each other. We look out after each other. And by the way, it's Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. Hey, you know what? You guys leave like around lunchtime. 1:00 is end of watch because you're a hard worker, and we're good to go. Yeah. So the day before Thanksgiving, you're good to go. And then you get a phone call saying, "Hey, Peterson Marrache got into an IA, and it's pretty serious. You know what? Cancel the pumpkin pie.
Yeah.
Don't bring it in." And guess what? Turn in your badge and your gun. You're assigned at home pending this investigation. Well, what are you talking about? I can't tell you much.
Yeah.
And so we create this process that looks very, very evil, right? It's super dark and it sucks, only to say that a year or two later, we kind of got it wrong. And that's what happened to Beto. It's the same thing, man. 3 years later, hey, sorry about that.
Yeah,
My bad.
Yeah.
You know what? Today you're working Adam 25. Go log on. Don't forget to go Coach 6.
Yeah.
You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
My bad. Sorry about that. And for the life of me, we have to change that. We can do much, much better. And so it's very draconian and it's very dark. We can agree to that. And so, man, I think that by having these conversations and, going to the Marlon Marrache Show, having people come in and share their experiences. And again, it's not lucky me, and I've been very fortunate. I haven't had a guest that's got an axe to grind or, they have to have this venting and really, this anger towards the department. I've been lucky that way, and I wouldn't allow it either. I think that we can have very respectful, professional conversations where we can say, hey, you know what? Yeah, the department could have done this better because I don't want this to happen to somebody else. And guess what? As much as I hate to say this, there's someone out there just like you right now in a police department that's going to go through this process, and hopefully we can make it better.
Have you ever changed any of your opinions because of a guest, or have you? I know you have a variety of guests, and some of them been characters. It's great. Have you ever been, oh, you know what? That makes me look at something a little bit different. Kind of like the education that we're trying to give the public. Okay, I can see looking at things a little bit different. Or you've been on both sides, so you seem to have a good perspective anyway. But I mean, it's interesting how some of the guests that you've had have gone through some crazy stuff. Yeah. And we keep going back to Beto. I mean, that guy's calm as a cucumber. I'm like, man, that would have given a lot of people a heart attack. In addition, people kill themselves over this type of stuff.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because now, and again, the show is an advocate or an affiliation of mental wellness. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah.
We never paid attention back in 98, back in 95. No one thought about discipline to be on the shelf with all these other PTSD and mental wellness issues. When you think of mental wellness, you think of what? We think about losing a partner that was killed in the line of duty, right? Suicide for whatever reason, divorce or just stress. Here's another one, workers' comp claim. You have all these back surgeries, you're just uncoding, pill popper, alcohol, right? DUIs, you name it. All those are issues that are at the forefront. But we never thought about, hey, we're sending this guy home on an IA, and we're not paying attention to the impact it has on their mind, on their psyche. And now we do, because as much as I hate to say this, but yes, there has been situations where people who have gone through the internal affairs process have had suicidal ideations, and some have committed suicide.
Yeah. In terms of the IA Guy podcast, what kind of feedback have you? I know we talked about this earlier, but do people are just reaching out to you, direct message, and has it been pretty positive?
Oh yes. You know what, brother? I thank God every day, because I've grown a lot, learned a lot from the show, but more than anything, it's very purposeful. I feel so relevant.
You have a mission.
Even more now than, not to say when I was a sergeant, I wasn't. I mean, being a sergeant is a great, sergeant job is awesome, dude, because you get to take care of your officers, and you're right in the middle there, and you get to talk to the bosses. So you have a major impact, and you can be very purposeful to your officers, right? But this show, man, has taken me in so many great avenues, and the people that I've met has just been unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's all been positive. Starting with the one that I told you the story about, this medium-sized agency who reached out to me. As a matter of fact, it was a sergeant that told him, hey, there's this podcast that's talking about what you're going through. And this upcoming guest, he is coming in, so I'm happy about that. Mm-hmm. Finally, he's going to talk about how his whole world just came to an end when he got terminated. And then we went to arbitration, and he got his job back, which was historical in that agency. No one has ever done that, ever.
And medium-sized?
Medium-sized agency. Yeah, I'll that's a teaser.
Sure.
for the future. But I do have another guest. The one guest that I'm almost closing in that I would love to have, not just for me, it's for everybody, is the one who did get terminated and has moved on, right? And to greener pastures, right? To a better life. I haven't had that guest yet, and I'm lining that up. I've had a lot of investigators. I've had some adjudicators, chiefs. I've had people who have worked the assignment, and some that have been subjects of internal affair complaints.
Yeah.
But what I haven't had yet is that one guest where they said, hey, you know what? I got an IA. I went through this whole process. I got terminated, and now I can no longer be a cop. And this is what I learned, from this situation. And I'm getting close. Now, with all that said, okay, great. Do you take some accountability? And lucky me, all my guests have said yes. There's got to be some form, or I should say some fraction of accountability coming from you. There's got to be some self-accountability.
Sure.
We can't just always just point the finger at the department. Hey man, the fucking department's after me. And this. This. We always blame it on the hell with those guys.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are after me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hold on a second. You got that DUI, dude. You got into that bar fight. You got into a fight with your wife, and the police had to respond. So, time out, bro. There's got to be some accountability on your part. As long as we're able to acknowledge and to accept that we are holding ourselves accountable, then we can talk about the process. Because even if you are guilty for what you did, that doesn't give the department the right to treat you the way they treated you. And you and I both know, man, that process, dude, is the punishment.
Yeah, it's a career that sometimes people are extremely fully in, and they can't do anything else, and that's crazy. Yeah. And
Yes.
fully
I'm
invested.
talking to who I consider a friend now. I call, I'm older now. So he's way younger. So I told him, hey, give Uncle Marlon a call. Just give Uncle a call, so we can talk. And yes, this one particular friend of mine, possible future guest, lost his identity. And the other thing that I've learned about the show and you know this because you also host a show, is that it's become very therapeutic for people, for my guests. Yeah. More than anything, it gives validation. It really does. It gives affirmation. I can go through a whole 30-year career. You know how LAPD does it, the funny flyer, that you put out. What, you're going to have everybody over, cake.
Yeah, the little caricature.
The character flyer.
Whatever you...
Yeah, your division, your trip down memory lane. And you'll take pictures, get the podium. People talk about you. You have good food and you're dancing this and that. But you know what? Look what the department put me through when I went through that IA. I never really told anybody. Why? Because our culture is what?
Yeah.
It's just, we don't talk about it. It's very, very taboo. And so that's why we have this show, is because, and here's the shittiest part. There are people out there who have gotten terminated.
Yeah.
Right? Or who have done some wrongdoing, who say, hold on a second. Look, the news articles and everything you heard about me, time out. That's not the way it went down. So where do they go and get closure and get, a chance to tell their side of the story? You don't have it.
Yeah.
More reasons to have police podcasts.
Yeah. And I think I talked to a mental health professional yesterday, and we're going to put that out in a couple of weeks, and we're all in this together.
Yes.
And it's like, you really don't need to backstab people. You don't need to be a jerk. You don't need to lie. Just do your job, do your investigation. Do you have any kids?
I do.
So would you recommend them getting into law enforcement right now?
Interesting you brought that up. My daughter did hit me up about probably less than a month ago talking about law enforcement. I'm trying to gear her to go to the FBI.
Good. Yeah.
I do. I can't shit on the career. What I will say is this: LAPD has afforded me so much success.
Yeah.
I am so thankful for the ride, the experience, and all my partners and my colleagues that I've met. And this is a reminder that even though we are talking about internal affairs, which no one likes, it's not sexy, right? And even though, we are the rat squad, whatever the case may be, I want to make sure that your audience understands that we are talking about a very, very, very small fraction of the population of law enforcement. So what I always say in every single show and every single podcast as a guest is that there's over 18,000 agencies throughout the United States, and there's north of 800,000 officers across the nation. You know what? There is corruption. There is cops cutting corners, and there's some shady ass cops, and there's cops that act like criminals in uniforms. For sure, 100% they're out there. There's bad actors. So I want your audience to know that, there's a lot of work we have to do, right? To your question in the beginning about why have internal affairs or what is internal affairs? Yeah, I would like to think that we want to protect the process, right? But at the same time, hey man, if you did some wrongdoing, we got to know whether it's outsourced or not. We got to get to the bottom of the truth. And there's that saying, a lot of people say, don't forget where you come from. Yeah. That is so true. I think at times when we promote and we climb up the ladder and we're an eye investigator, we kind of tend to forget that, hey, dude, you kind of pushed the sled. We were out there together and going code 6, dude, doing traffic stops, fucking building searches, et cetera, et cetera. So, let's get factual and not, have that investigation, give the adjudicator and guide them to read and tell a story that is, one, conclusory, two, that paints a picture that's so biased that it's kind of opinion based. Yeah. That's what we were talking about earlier. You put a heading of findings, you determine the outcome if you had the chief of police. Yeah. If I was the chief, what you're telling me, then why do you need me?
Yeah. Yeah. You did it.
Why don't you go ahead and scally them?
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like I don't have to do anything. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, those things are very, very important. So
before we wrap this up, how can people get a hold of you? What the best channels, all of it?
Well, I mean, you got to go to YouTube, the Marlon Marrache Show. That's where you see all the interviews. We got some really good guests coming up. We try to drop at least 2 episodes a week. And if you are that grandfather, over 65, over 55, I should say also, and even over 45 or in your 40s, right? And you're a civilian and you just binge on that true crime, uncle, auntie, and just love police body cam incidents, all those traffic stops with the crazy Karens. And, it's, to be quite honest, it's so educational for the public because they see how much patience, which is one of the things that we do, how an officer deals with all these situations that creates a lot of trauma and a lot of chaos. Go to the Marlon Report. It's a really good channel where I narrate and host it. So,
well, I can't wait to check that out. I've got some swag for you. I've got a T-shirt.
Bro. Look at that.
So you can work out in.
I'm gonna wear that in my next episode, brother.
I appreciate that. I got a hat. I noticed you wear these types of hats.
Yes.
And then I noticed you had.
Oh, dude, you're gonna make it.
Challenge coin. So I want to be out there.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'll put it on when you come out and visit me because you owe me a visit to the studio, and I'm gonna have to go through another process of elimination on my
I
five.
I love it.
I got to put you up, brother.
That'd be great. And then, but thanks again for coming on. This has been super informative. I hope people enjoy it. I'm sure they will. I want to make sure everybody knows not to forget to go code 6 and stay safe.
There
That's
you
his
go.
Tagline at the end. I love it. Thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
You got it, brother.
All right,
Anytime.
take care.